that's why the chicken came before the egg.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. I don't think it works. I think the egg came before the chicken for sure.
I think Bingo is the name of the farmer, not the dog.
This episode, we're going to talk about ALPR. Hi, Dalton.
Hey, Jamie. Automatic license plate reading cameras.
Yes.
For those of you out there that don't know what that means.
That's right. So a whole episode dedicated to what they are, why we use them, how should we be using them, etc.
Why they're super, super important to everything policing.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the basics. How does an ALPR work?
Yeah. So the way an ALPR camera works is it's essentially a camera that looks for license plates. That at its core, that's really all it does. There's different types of them. There's fixed, stationary, that are, on the side of the road. There's mobile, which are mounted to a vehicle, be it a patrol car or, even a third-party company that drives around doing that. But at its core, all they're really doing is just a camera that is looking at license plates and giving information.
So easy enough, right? As you see the generations of ALPR progress, those cameras, just like everything else in tech world, get smaller and smaller, better and better quality imagery, etc. What does that camera do with those pictures?
Yeah, so you're talking about, when you back up and think about ultimately how this fits in, how do ALPR fit in to the law enforcement space to solve crimes? As long as the vehicle that people drive is the primary mode of transportation, both for private citizens and criminal suspects, it is going to be a vital piece of the tech stack that is in a law enforcement agency, because identifying vehicles that criminals are using, bad guys are using to commit crimes, is extremely important for investigative leads.
Yeah. And this is probably our first chance to discuss the usefulness of certain technologies outside of just general law enforcement, right? So, you see these at hospitals, you see them at shopping centers, you see them, with at sporting event venues, right? Yeah. What good is it for those folks to have LPR? Yeah. What value does that bring to a business if we wanted to talk to a commercial community?
Well, how many times have you seen the picture of the car that's 100 yards away or 50 yards away, and it's this blurry image, and they put it in the newspaper, they put it in the news? Can you identify this car? No.
Right.
No. Live cameras, they're great. They have their fit. We'll talk about that in a later episode. But what they don't do is they don't definitively identify a vehicle.
Yeah.
So, and that extends past law enforcement. Commercial has need for that. Who's committing shoplifting? Who's doing ORC at my stores?
Who's dropping off a shooting victim at your hospital?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They have the same need for it. Now, maybe not criminal in nature, but still a need to identify a vehicle.
Sure. Yeah, and you look at schools everywhere else. Something is in the vein of workplace violence restraining orders. If you work for a company that has LPR around the parking areas of your company, and that a protected party works at your company, you could upload that to a hot list. It could tell you. In turn, allow you to notify your employer or whatever procedure they put in place. So just wanted to give a little background on how that can help other communities. And other communities, so we have commercial, we have law enforcement, homeowners associations. Any difference in how it helps them or why they would even want something like that? Or is it the same as what we talked about with commercial?
I think it all comes down to the fact that, and this is something law enforcement I think is not great at, there's a lot of room for improvement here, is that people out of law enforcement want to be part of the team. They want to help, right? They want to help solve crimes. They want to help do their part. And law enforcement as a profession is historically not very good at allowing citizens to take part in that.
Yeah.
So take an HOA, for example. they don't want people coming into their neighborhood, breaking into cars, breaking into houses, stealing things. So their way of contributing to the public safety mission, if you will, is, all right, fine, I'll put some technology out. This will be our small part of, helping to solve crime.
Yeah, yeah. And, we started to break into, as an industry, the value of LPR as it relates to kind of all hazards public safety, right? If you think wildfire evacuation, right? Yeah. If you have some equipment that you can place quickly, right? Kind of a quick reaction style cache of equipment. And that cache of equipment can include deployable battery operated ALPR. Yeah. You can put those around your evacuation zone and enhance the intelligence of what inevitably becomes a mutual aid response. You have officers from 150 miles away patrolling this area, and you start to get that intel there.
Yeah, help me unpack that. Help everybody unpack that. Like, why would an ALPR be useful in that particular case?
Yeah, there's two scenarios there. One is evacuations in the moment. One is evacuation zone security after the initial evacuation. So evacuations in the moment. If you have ALPR that are always positioned in particular locations throughout your jurisdiction, let's say that we'll use wildfire, being from California, that's certainly prevalent there. And you have an evacuation that has been ordered, and that evacuation includes half of your jurisdiction. As folks start to evacuate, you're able to use analytics from an ALPR camera to determine how much traffic has gone down your evacuation route, just by number of car counts, et cetera. And the agency can start to compare that against how much traffic typically flows during that time of day, that day of week, and at minimum give themselves a decent understanding of the effectiveness of the evacuation, to the extent where you then start to look at, were there any vehicles going the opposite direction of the evacuation, right, into the evacuation zone? And maybe those are more important, to where now we look at it and we go, we have 3 cars that went in. And so we know that at minimum we need to find those 3 cars if possible. So that's during the evacuation. That can be used with LPR that you already have in place.
Sure.
Once you establish your evacuated zone, your secure zone, then the majority of extended mutual aid for evacuations is scene security, right? And so it's that we need X number of officers, 12-hour shifts, front and back of the day, to patrol these areas that are evacuated, to protect from home break-ins, and also at the same time ensure that folks aren't in danger still, right? So it's kind of dual purpose. So in that scenario, you can deploy mobile LPR that are flexible to go and put them around your entire zone, which then tells you, are cars coming in and out of that? Are all the cars that are going past that police cars? Then we're good, right? Otherwise, we're not so good, and maybe we need to know that. So, and that can be deployed. I keep mentioning the word flexible, because once that situation is done, those can go back into, say, a cache somewhere. And offices of emergency services know about radio caches all day long, right? There's boxes of these radios they deploy for these, just for that. This would be the same concept there.
Yeah. See, I've actually never thought about it that way, because my personal experience with ALPR and with my background was almost exclusively criminal in nature.
Right.
And I think it's funny to admit, like, if you back up a couple of years before we even had that, like, I was actually an opponent of fixed LPR. Did I ever tell you that story?
No.
Yeah.
No.
So I didn't think it held a lot of value in terms of like the cost to value, because my experience at the time, this was years ago.
Yeah.
It was tremendously expensive.
Yeah.
To put fixed ALPR at a single intersection.
But effective.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it started to capture things that...
it was effective. In that one spot.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about a 6-figure number,
yeah,
you start to ask, I I could take that money and do X, Y, and Z
Sure.
and get a lot more coverage
Sure.
with a different set of technology,
Yeah.
theoretically. But I really came around when it got more affordable and
Yeah.
it got more feasible that you could just go put LPR
Yeah.
practically everywhere.
So I was also an opponent of fixed LPR. And
Interesting.
It had nothing to do with the cost for me.
Okay.
It had everything to do with my agency only had 3 of them, and so it wasn't that effective.
Okay.
Right? And so I looked at it as, well, I've got them on every squad car. Why would I ever want to get rid of that? Right? And let me be clear. All LPR is valuable.
Yeah.
In my opinion. But what, I think as an agency, we had to look at, are our patrol cars that are outfitted with LPR driving around our city 24 hours a day?
Right.
If the answer is yes, you may make a case that mobile LPR makes absolute sense in your agency. If your answer is no, or even I won't use the word worse necessarily, but if you have take-home cars that have LPR on them, those cars are in service 40 hours a week. Are you getting your return on investment there? So I think there does need to be some budget play in that, but I was an opponent of the concept initially. I remember telling folks in this industry that we both now work in,
Yeah.
like, hey, when are we going to get them on the cars, right? And so what we found, though, is we were able to put a net around the entire city
Yeah.
with positioned permanent LPR, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
Right, the results of that, and we can get into that, just the results of what they do.
Yeah, so because I had the same experience with mobile LPR. I actually had mobile LPR on my car when I drove around the intelligence unit. The problem with that is it falls victim to what I kind of jokingly refer to as the pace car effect. So imagine you're in a marked unit and you're driving down the road. What does everybody do around you?
Sure.
They pace you.
Yeah.
They go with you.
Yeah.
So you're not really scanning more plates. You might be getting
Yeah.
cars coming the other direction, but the number of plates that you're actually scanning in a mobile
Yeah,
is dramatically lower than the number of plates that you're scanning with a stationary.
yeah,
And this is an important thing to point out, because at the end of the day, a license plate reading camera is just a tool to collect information. Do you agree with that?
I do.
That's
Yeah.
really at its core.
Yeah.
What cars are at this location at this time? That's
Right.
really all it is.
Right.
So if you say, I'm going to put a fixed camera at this spot in a high crime spot that's a major roadway, and know every single license plate that passes by 24 hours a day,
Yeah,
every single day of the year, that's extraordinarily valuable information to law enforcement.
sure. Yeah, and it's when you're able to collect information that may be useful in a crime. There's also the discussion on data retention, right? And it's a hot button topic, right?
Yeah, privacy in general.
Absolutely. And so, when we went to a 30-day retention, department-wide, we thought, well, this won't work, right? We need retention that's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The concept internally is, and it's an easy thing to justify on both sides of the argument, right? The concept for me, and the example I always use for I need longer retention, is what happens if somebody is the victim of, let's use a sex crime here, and they don't, for whatever reason, report that immediately, right?
Right.
And that's a rabbit hole I don't need to go down. But, for whatever reason, they don't report it immediately. What if they report it 6 months later, and the single most useful piece of information they had was a vehicle description, right?
Right.
And now we don't have that data. So it's easy to show that and go, yeah, we should have that. And then on the opposite side of that, society would say, yeah, but you're also collecting the data of every other car that has gone through
Even
there.
though it's legally allowed.
Yeah.
We're not comfortable
That's right.
with this amount.
Yeah.
We're
So
okay with this, but not this.
yeah. So we quickly adapted, right? We wrote procedures that essentially said if we need ALPR, we need to, if it's let's say we get a hot list hit on a wanted homicide suspect, then we need to download that picture and attach it to the case while we have the data. So you can work within that. Now, with that said, there are agencies that because of the volume of work they have,
they literally need data longer in order to make it useful.
Right.
Would
Because they won't even touch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I had that problem. I was a detective for a while, big city.
Yeah.
There were some cases I didn't even touch.
Yeah.
For 30 days.
Yeah.
Didn't even look at them because I didn't have time.
Yeah, let's talk about, so while we stick on data for just a second and privacy, if you audit your usage of LPR adequately, in my belief, if you audit it right and you have a procedure for audits and you audit it timely and you ensure that your users are using it to fit within the policy you have, and you have a retention schedule, right? A department retention schedule that supports whatever the retention number is, then in the big picture, you as an agency are protecting the citizens and their privacy, right? In the sense that we're not just going to willy-nilly run cars just because we feel like it, right? We in law enforcement, for decades, hire ethical people. At least we hope we do, right?
Well, there's procedures. I mean, you literally put those things in place.
That's right.
To vet these people out that they are a step above the normal citizen with deeper background checks, higher standards.
Right. And so you combine that with, you should, if you don't do it now, should have a very clear policy for use, right? And a policy around that includes retention, includes purging, et cetera. And then you ensure that is done the right way. And if you have that oversight, you hire the ethical people, you have the policy in place, theoretically, it's the same as every other piece of data that we in law enforcement had access to when I worked in law enforcement, right? It's that we just don't go and do that, and there's a big segment of that. So it's a topic, we could probably spend 3 hours talking just about privacy and data on that, right?
Yeah.
So with ALPR, why is that the answer we all in the real-time center space, well, I won't say all, a lot of us in the real-time center space say that is the answer we give everybody of, you start with that.
Yeah. So the reason why I think it's so incredibly valuable is, going back to, it's just a device that collects information. That's all it is. But we always want our police departments to be more efficient. We want them to work better.
Yeah.
Right? An ALPR, especially stationary ALPR, actually touches a lot of different areas. Like I want reactive investigations after the fact.
Right.
I want to make my detectives better at solving crimes. Like that by itself is a tremendously valuable area.
Yeah.
But they're also proactive in nature.
Okay.
They're giving you alerts on active offenders.
Yeah.
Or stolen cars or wanted felons in the moment.
Yeah.
That's a completely different side of the policing world that is arguably equally as valuable.
Yeah, and if we know a particular car with a particular license plate is associated with, let's say, catalytic converter thefts, right? If we know that and we put that into a hot list only during the hours that we know we're going to be looking for it, and then we allow the ALPR network to help us find it, that is of value to our community, right? Especially if we find it before they steal any catalytic converters that night or that day, right? Speaking of value, how does law enforcement budget for ALPR when it comes to return on investment, right? How do you say this dollar amount is okay because of this win?
Yeah.
Right?
So I think it comes down to, obviously it's the individual decision makers, decision to make, that out in their own mind. What is valuable, what is not valuable. But I think the mistake that a lot of people make is seeing a fixed license plate reader or a mobile license plate reader as a camera.
Yeah.
It's not.
Right.
It's a tool to collect information.
Right.
So if I tell you, I want to sell you a camera for $5,000.
Yeah.
Let's just throw a number out. And you're like, man, that's a lot of money for a camera.
Yeah.
But if I take that same conversation, let's go back in time and I say, hey, for $5,000, I can tell you every single car that passes a roadway on this street in this high crime area. Like,
Yeah.
You put it that way, and you're
Sure.
like, oh, well, that's a lot more valuable.
Yeah. No, yeah, and true. And I think that's where, there's a finite budget at every agency.
Sure.
Right. And it honestly, having been a part of watching budgets get created, right? That's not an easy topic in a lot of departments, right? To find money and to generate spend that they're used to spending on other things, right?
Right.
And so that's where that balance is tricky, I would say. It's that, can we catch a homicide suspect with ALPR data? Sure. Does that value equal the apprehension of that? Some would say yes, some would say no.
Well,
right?
I would say, another thing that a lot of people don't necessarily measure, and they probably should, is the tangible versus the intangible. And let me explain. So, tangible you can measure. I had 15 stolen cars last month, and I recovered them because of ALPR. That's an easy thing to measure.
Yeah.
What's difficult to measure is I'm giving my officers, especially my younger officers, a new way of policing the city.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you would agree.
Yeah. It
that
changed.
Younger officers, they police differently.
Sure.
Yeah.
Way back in the day, right?
Back in your day.
Way back in my day. There were officers that were known as very good at finding stolen vehicles, right? They knew what cars to run, right? And they would find those. And they still exist.
Yeah.
Those officers still exist, right? But imagine now that you have 50 of those officers on duty at any given time in a normal sized city, right?
100%.
That's what we're talking about. So let's go to a solve story on this and see how we've utilized those in that, and we'll come back and talk about that afterwards.
Let's do it. Katie, take us away.
All right, everyone. Today's solve story is a sad one. We hate reporting on heinous crimes, especially ones that end in the taking of multiple lives. But there is a silver lining here, and that's a child returned home to her family. So detectives in Louisiana were investigating a missing persons case. They go to the house and they located Callie Brunette's deceased body in her bedroom. Now, while that was tragic in itself, very quickly, deputies on scene realized that her two young children, 4 years old and 6 years old, were both missing, along with her black Chrysler 200. Now, this led to a frantic nationwide search, including the issuance of an Amber Alert. The problem is that this suspect went across state lines, and typically this can create a lot of confusion amongst law enforcement. But using flock safety LPRs to track the stolen vehicle, officers were led to Byron, Mississippi, where they located that suspect. The suspect happened to be Callie's ex-boyfriend, and he had not only murdered her, but had kidnapped her 2 children. Now the question, where are the little girls? So in a wooded area, a short distance from where he was located, officers found the vehicle as well as both little girls in a pit in the woods. The younger child, 4 years old, was unfortunately deceased. But Callie's other daughter, 6 years old, was thankfully alive, albeit injured. Without LPR, this search might have taken longer, and in this case, every single minute mattered. Crossing state lines shouldn't be an easy getaway for suspects, and flock safety helped bridge the gap, ensuring the safety of one little girl and providing justice for both Callie and her baby girl.
I mean, that was a significant solve story.
Yeah, that's
right.
I mean, you obviously never want to hear about that, but the best ending possible, I guess.
Sure.
You'd say.
Yeah. For the circumstances, that's the ending that you would want to have on that, right? I think that's one of the myths of LPR is, and this is just because I think it is what it was used for prolifically when it first came out. LPR finds stolen cars.
Yeah.
Right? Through our solve stories, you can see LPR is so much more than stolen cars.
Yeah. It's the, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's the ability to target vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And, historically, going back to this story, the car's missing.
Yeah.
You're naturally, as an investigator, assuming it's part of the crime. We have to find it as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah.
So, back up 10 years ago and you're just verbally telling people, go look for this car.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy what we can do with LPR. So on the capture and solve rate, right? The easy things to understand: stolen car hits against NCIC sheet, we've got it. Now let's go find it. We recover it, right? Wanted car, homicide, like that solved story, kidnapping, things like that, right? And that starts talking about an LPR data network.
Yeah.
How is that useful in that? It's almost self-explanatory, but let's say that a couple of children are kidnapped, right? And we have the plate, and we put the plate in. How does an LPR network help with that investigation?
Yeah, so, obviously the network is extremely important, especially when you're talking about cross-jurisdictionally, because as you well know, and everybody else knows, crime does not abide by jurisdictional boundaries.
Right.
So being able to tell somebody
Yep.
that theoretically is 500 miles away, you're never going to call them on the radio and say, hey, look for this car.
Yeah, you may not know they're going there. You may not have any
you have no idea.
inclination, right?
No idea.
Okay.
But you can have that hit in to alert, and then all of a sudden they're informed of that.
Yeah.
500 miles away, 1,000 miles away.
Yeah, and it's important to point out that NCIC does that. The only piece it doesn't do is find the car for you, right? That's where LPR steps in.
Right.
And so we have to rely on the NCIC or its version, state version of a system, to upload that car so that it does happen statewide, that it's wanted or nationwide. But that now becomes reliant on ALPR to give that early alert. Hey, this car, we've queried it against that system, and it is wanted for this, right? I want to make sure the listeners understand that, a network of LPR is fantastic. There is a reliance on a hot list system, for lack of a less complicated explanation, in the NCIC network to do that. So it's good to know that we have a system that is able to bring a case to conclusion,
Yeah.
right? To help our investigators get to a solvability rate that is hopefully better than what they have.
Yeah,
usually, or more efficient.
Despite the obviously tragic outcome of this, recovering the girl, probably because of the license plate reader camera that was in existence, is the best outcome you could have hoped for.
Yeah.
Terrible outcome.
Sure.
But under the circumstances.
Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit, because, we both stated that we didn't believe in license plate reading cameras a long time ago. And now we both do, obviously.
Yeah.
I've got it in my mind, like where my mind was changed. Do you have it at the top of your mind where, like, when you realized?
Yeah, mine was changed instantly when we installed multiple cameras in the city, because we started recovering more vehicles immediately. It actually made me do a double take on my thought about how many wanted vehicles we had going through our city. Right. The other piece, though, that just cemented it for me was when we used ALPR to help solve a vehicular homicide with no witnesses.
Right.
And the ALPR camera ultimately was the witness.
Yeah.
Right. And so that did it for me.
Yeah. So
Yours?
mine was it was literally the first week that we had ours. We went and put them out, and because we were having a series of carjackings at a pretty well-known park. It wasn't like a shady park at all. It was a nice park, and pretty much without, on clockwork, this guy was coming up in I think it was a red car, if I remember correctly, getting dropped off and then carjacking somebody at gunpoint. And we had no idea who he was. It was difficult for us staffing-wise to go put an officer out there 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
But we put that camera out in that park, like literally the second day we had it, happened again, and we identified him. And then we just went to his house and arrested him. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm sold.
Yeah. It's easy to find wins with LPR.
Yeah.
It really is. And especially if you start to incorporate that into your real-time policing strategy, where you're uploading plates as they occur in a local hot list. It's a changer.
Yeah, for sure. So if you haven't already, look into it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see everybody next time, and I somewhat look forward to doing this again with you.
Yeah, same for you.
Thanks.